Good morning, everybody. How are we?
Very well.
Good. As you can see, I've got a really special guest with us today. My mother, Betty.
Hello, everybody.
Who's really looking forward to talking to you. Yeah, wave, 7 wave. Looking forward to talking to you and sharing her story about growing up in wartime Brighton, starting a career in the Midland Bank in Brighton in 1952, becoming a mother in the late 50s and then in 1960, returning to work a few years later, looking for flexible and agile work so that she could look after her 2 children and get the best of both worlds. And then eventually ending her career with 14 years in the city, working for what in those days was called the Policy Signing and Accounting Centre.
Yes.
Or PSAC,
yes.
Which was by Temple Underground Station.
Yeah, over the top of the underground station.
So let's start, Mum, with your childhood. So you were born in 1933 in May.
Yes.
And
the 4th child.
The 4th child of 5.
And we lived just up from the beach. And my mother used to take us down on the beach every day, if she could, because we could make a mess on the beach and were told to take it home with us. And it didn't make her house dirty. The war came, and of course the whole of the seafront was shut off. And only people like my dad, who was in the ARP, I think he was in the ARP or he was in some sort of voluntary service, could go along there. My brothers, 2 brothers and my sister, because they were over the age of 11, and if they'd stayed down, we had first of all evacuees living with us from London. And then they sent them back to London, and then about 1942, my 2 brothers and sisters were evacuated up north. The whole school went. Well, luckily I was under 11, so the school I went to, which was a very small little school, were not evacuated. My sister was lucky. She went and lived with a vet who'd got 2 boys and always wanted a girl. And right up until they died, these people she lived with, she went and visited every year. My 2nd brother, and they say the 2nd child is the naughty child.
Mm.
And he was naughty. He was always in trouble up there and hated it. Well, unfortunately, in 1948, my dad died. He'd been gassed in the First World War. And I was taken out of school at 14, coming up just to 15. I was just 15. But if I can go back one step, my husband wasn't evacuated, or his sister, and they left school at 13. There were no schooling down there for them.
It stopped, didn't it?
It all stopped. If you were that age, it all stopped, and you had to go out to work. Well, I went and lived with an aunt and uncle, and my youngest brother was sent to a Masonic boarding school. I lived with his aunt and uncle up in Coventry, who'd never had any children. I didn't know them, and they ran a big hotel. I wasn't allowed to go swimming anymore, and I was a very good swimmer, almost as good as him. And because of walking back into the hotel with wet hair, it wasn't very nice. Well, they did good by me. They sent me to secretarial college, and I learnt shorthand, typing and bookkeeping. Then I came back in 1949 to live with my mother.
But before you go there, because after the evacuees that came and lived with you, you had Canadian soldiers that were billeted with you?
We had Canadian and German,
not German, hopefully,
American soldiers billeted on us. And you had no choice. If you had the bedrooms, you had to have them. And this old lady that lived in a bungalow next door to us had never been married, and she had to have these American soldiers billeted on her and was really frightened. We loved them because they had food parcels delivered. And if you go back to sweet rationing, we were allowed, I think it was £1/4 pound of sweets a month. So to get a box of sweets was like the best.
You get chewing gum as well. Did you have some chewing gum?
No, I don't like chewing gum.
Okay, all right.
We got things like bananas and peanuts and funny things like that. The older girls got nylon stockings. And we used to also, the park, which was just round the corner from us, was a great big tower with a gun on the top. And those soldiers, 3/4 of the park had been turned into allotments. And my dad had an allotment. I don't know who dug it for him because he wouldn't have done it. And we went and used to pinch lettuce and tomatoes off there in exchange for sweets. And they used to cook us dinner sometimes. So to go back to coming to work.
Well, before that, because you mentioned being a good swimmer. You also played tennis.
Oh, I played tennis and netball and
stool ball.
Stool ball, which most of you have you ever heard of stool ball? No. It's very much like cricket, and you have wickets, but the wicket is up shoulder high, and you hold a bat up. And it's so fast and you bowled underarm. And we all played cricket. We all played stool ball in Sussex. So that was nice. I played netball for Sussex. And if I can say, when I swam, I was most probably the fastest under 15 backstroker in Sussex.
Really?
Can you say that?
No, I can't. No.
Well, he's a better swimmer than me. I don't mean that literally. So, do I go on to going to work now?
Yeah, well, why not? Why not? So you finished school. You came back down from Coventry, where you were staying after your dad died, and you got a job in a jeweller's as a trainee accountant.
I went to the Labour Exchange to get a job in those days. And they gave you what we used to refer to as your cards. I don't know. And they sent me to this company who had a big warehouse in Brighton. And they had shops all round the seaside resorts in England. And my first job was to add up the tally rolls. And I wasn't allowed to... that's the till roll from the shops. I wasn't allowed to use the adding machine. I had to learn to add up by hand.
Pounds, shillings and pence?
Pounds, shillings and pence. And then I'd stick the stamps on the letters.
Ooh.
Very lucky,
Brilliant.
wasn't I?
Brilliant.
I thought, I'd been to college for a year.
But what were the options for a girl in those days as well?
Nothing.
What sort of, hairdressers, nurses?
The school I went to, which was a private school, and then it turned into a state school and became an 11+ school. But I had to get in there on an entrance exam. You still had to take an exam to get in there. And when you left, they expected you to either be a teacher or a nurse.
Teacher.
If you did anything else, you'd wasted your time. And the head teacher just thought girls like me had wasted my time going there.
Right.
Well, I got articles to this accountant, but silly like, I passed part 1. I passed part 2 of my accountancy exams at evening classes, not day release. And at 19, I thought, what am I doing this for? Mm-hmm. I'm going to get married, as we all thought. I'm going to have children, and I would never, ever work again. Mm-hmm. And that was what, in the 1940s and 50s, women thought, and it's what actually happened to you. Well, one of my sister-in-laws said to me, she worked for William Deacon's. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. That's a bank that was around in the 40s and 50s, and they used to clear their money through one of the big 5 banks. And she said, go in the bank, Betty, go in the bank. She said, you're not going to go back to work ever again, and you'll earn more money. It was the best paid office job in Brighton and Hove. So I went into the bank and I worked in a big branch. I don't know if any of you know Brighton and Hove, but it was down North Street, and we had accounts like AA, who used to bring all their checks in at 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
AA, the car
people. Yeah. And another big company, I can't think who it was now. And when you went to work, you had to sign on in the morning. And if you were late 3 times in the year, you were told you wouldn't get a pay increase. And everybody between the ages of 18 and 25 got a pay increase every year. And then it stopped, and you never got another one unless you were promoted. Well, we had to sign on at before 9 o'clock in the morning. And talking about working hours, we worked until the accountant decided we could leave. He'd put the book out. He had been in the army, and I think he was a sergeant major, and he ran that bank like a sergeant major, and we all had to do as we were told. The other thing that was really difficult, and none of you will remember this, cheques didn't have names on them. And we had to be able to read, if you can imagine it, 30 or 50 people whose name was Smith. And you had to recognise their signature by the writing. And we just posted it onto the ledgers, and then another girl the next morning would post it onto the statements. And that's how they assured. And in all the 4 years I was in that branch, we only got 1 mispost.
1 mispost.
And we got into dreadful trouble for it. We had to go into I did the ledger and another girl did the statement. And we had to go in and see the manager, who we called Sir, and we were frightened to talk to. And the other thing I'd like to mention is in June and December, we worked up till 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night. You didn't get paid overtime. And if you worked after 9 o'clock, you got 1 6 tea money, which is about 9p in today's thing. We were allowed out for half an hour, and it brought us a piece of cheese on toast and a cup of tea. And that was our overtime pay. But if we, on New Year's Eve, if we could get out before 11 o'clock, we used to be allowed into the New Year's Eve dances, and we didn't have to pay. The ballrooms down here would let all bank clerks in for nothing on New Year's Eve. Well, then I got married, and I lost all my rights. I lost my pension rights. I lost everything. And if I had a baby, I knew that no way would they take me back to work again. But we all accepted that because we didn't ever think we would. And if I'm honest, I don't think I went back to a proper job till I was 14. I used to fit in with my children's holidays and wouldn't work then. And the jobs I did were like market research, and I did politicals. Like I'd go to the house and I'd have to speak to Mrs. Freed. Mr. Freed would be all upset. Why wasn't I speaking to him? And I said, on my list, it says Tina Freed. And so I had to ask her questions like, what do you think of Ted Heath?
Oh,
so that's
interesting. But just before you go on to that part of your life, just going back to the bank. So some of the things. One, it seems as if it was a very formal type environment, a very formal culture where mistakes weren't tolerated, and there was a hierarchy, and you had to call the manager sir. And there wasn't a career path for girls in the bank at all.
You were 35. In my branch in North Street, Brighton, we had one girl on the tills, like the cash desk.
Tellers.
Well, we used to call it tills.
Tills, okay. Yeah.
And we all wanted to go on the front house, but we got all the rotten jobs, like when all the stuff came over from the counter over to us, we had to sort it, put it into the order of which banks were going to clear it and all that sort of thing, and then pass our checks over to a guy, we weren't even allowed to do that, who looked at all the signatures and made sure that they were legal. Or we would work round the back in a tiny little room, posting ledgers and statements. But we got, I will say, more pay than, I think I went into the bank on £4 a week.
Right.
When I did my first job, and when I left it, I was on £2.17 and 6 a week. And one of my nephews, great nephews, said to me the other day, was that an hour, Betty, or was it, what was it? And when I said a week, he couldn't believe it.
Lovely. So also you had some strange things in your contracts of employment, things for the marriage bar.
Yes, we had strange things. 2 weeks holiday a year we had. Saturday mornings, if you were going on holiday, you had to go into work on Saturday morning. Yeah. You didn't have that off. Once you got married, you were taken, all your rights, your pension rights and everything else was taken away from you. And some of those weren't lifted until 1975. And that was in government bodies, not in, I don't know when they were lifted in banks. But when I was in the bank, I said to somebody, what are all these money going out every month from staff banks to the Scottish widows? And they said that was husbands paying for their wives' pensions. Because like nowadays, a pension passes over to the other partner. It didn't in those days. And when my dad died, it didn't pass over to my mother. But they were so upset. I know I'm going back a bit. They were so upset, they changed their pension scheme and gave my mother a pension.
Okay. All right, so you had the marriage bar, so your contract of employment would effectively, or could effectively finish the day you got married.
Yeah.
And I guess if it didn't finish then, the society said that when you had your first child, you'd give up work, which is what you did.
Yes.
Yeah. And so you had a few years off after my sister Carol was born, and then I was born, and then in the mid-60s or late 60s, you became a board. I started school, and you decided to go and look for some flexible and agile working, which worked around school hours and school days and allowed you to be a mother, but also go out and do some interesting things?
Well, I did that. I said to my husband, we'd moved from Birmingham down to West Wickham, which is between Croydon and Bromley. And I didn't know a soul, and I was bored out of my brains. And my husband said to me, you've got two choices. Either go and get another job or have another baby. And I thought, I don't want another baby, thank you. But he said, if you earn any money, you're not to spend it.
Mm-hmm.
And my husband wasn't like that. I could do what I like, but he said, what happens if we come to rely on it and you can't do it anymore because one of the children are ill or something? And he was very sensible because we bought our first caravan with that money.
Uh-huh.
And when I went back to work, many proper work, many years later, I went and worked for Bupa. Now that must have been in the 1973, I should think. You called the manager, sir, if you ever spoke to him. You put your hand up if you wanted to go to the toilet. And I was quite experienced, and the job I went for was a sales ledger clerk. So I was bored out of my brains, and I accepted this job through an agency. And I was really nervous. And after a week, I said to my husband, I can't stand this any longer. And he said to me, stay there, Betty, because my husband had become quite seriously ill and we didn't know whether he'd ever work again. And he said, be a bit careful where you go next time.
Uh-huh.
So I stayed there, but it was awful. It was awful. It was like being back at school again, run by a manager, male, with about 4 bossy women assistant managers. And that's how women got when they actually got promotion in those days. They thought they were, they were the top dogs and they'd tell you what to do. I left there and went and worked for a builder who built in the local high street. That was really convenient because I just walked up the road and walked home again. And they built great big blocks of flats. And I couldn't believe it that you called the owner, there were 3 of them, you called them by their Christian names. That, I'd never done that before. And I didn't know I was in a pension scheme. Mm-hmm. They never told you things like that. And I don't think they had to give you contracts of employment in those days. And they certainly didn't have to give you certificates every year telling you what your pension scheme was worth. And I stayed there for 6 years, but it was very nice. But being in this high street all the time, I got fed up with that, and I've got to be careful how I say this, the men were all having affairs with women. And they'd come up into my office and start prancing and talking off about it, all very proudly. And I got fed up with this, so I left that job and went up to policy signing and accounting, where I got all my perks, I got my London allowance, I got a very, very good pension scheme. We got 40/60th, and our London allowance is included in it. And I don't know about now, but years ago they didn't include a lot of people the London allowance in your pension schemes. And I worked there for about 13 or 14 years. And they grew from a little tiny company of 75 to about 350 in my days. And what they used to do was instead of, if policies were reinsured, instead of sending them round to 10 companies, they would be checked in our office, signed for all 10 companies. They also, and I helped set this up, they also settled all payments between non-Lloyd's banks, insurance companies, and brokers. Mm-hmm. And we got it down to 3 days. So when the money was coming in, 3 days later we got it out. That was really interesting doing that. But as it grew, I took over the HR work. I liked that much better. And the best job I ever did in my life was, I was going to retire in 1993, and my boss said, sit down. He said, Betty, if you work another year for me, and it will gradually peter out, he said, the whole company's moving down to Folkestone. I will let you work from home sometimes, or you might not have to work at all. And I can't imagine them doing this back in the 50s. I was made redundant one day, and the next day got my pension.
Oh, brilliant.
So ended my career. Yeah. Was there anything else you wanted to ask?
No, that's lovely. So how did things change in the office environment from the 1950s to the 1980s?
Well, I was the chief executive's friend, mm-hmm. and the accountant's friend, mm-hmm. and they used to call me Auntie Betty. Right. And I was only about 10 years older than them, and they treated me as something special, yeah. which was really lovely way to end your career. Yeah. The chief executive had trouble with his second wife and the kids, but he used to sit and talk to me about it all. And I loved looking after all the staff. Yeah. It was much better than going 4 and 4 make 8.
8? You said 10 then, didn't you? Brilliant. Mum, thanks so much for sharing that. What an interesting and wonderful story. I was wondering whether there's any questions from anybody out there in the audience. And I'm on my iPad, so I can't see you all. So come off mute or wave, and we'll try and bring you into the conversation. Anyone got any questions?
Hello, Mark.
Laura, hi.
Can you hear me? Hello, very well. I suppose it might be a question for you, Mark, or maybe for Betty, but I'm just getting to know you, Mark. To what extent is your mum the inspiration for you having a business that focuses on female careers? Or Betty, maybe you could say you've influenced him to put women forward.
Clearly, I can't get a word in edgeways, really.
I haven't influenced him in any way. I talk to him. I've always talked to him about money. I've always talked to him when he used to say he wanted something, and I'd go, I hadn't got the money, and he used to say to me, don't be silly, mother, of course you have. I said, that's not money to spend on things. And I've always felt that Mark was more like me than he was his dad. And we've always been able to talk about anything to each other without getting upset, which I think is really important. And he still goes to me, what are you worrying about money for, mother? But that's part of your nature, isn't it? When I saw what happened to my mother, and what I saw what happened to people in the banks, when I saw people not getting their husbands' pensions and all this sort of thing, I was very, very, very sure, and right from an early age, these kids were very young, I took out policies which were really cheap, to cover me for if anything happened to their dad. And the policy, you got less money as the kids got older. And he's been brought up with somebody, and I don't know what he does with his money now. I don't ask him, it's none of my business. But he's not going to stop me saying, if it's £10 cheaper when we go out looking for my hands-free phones in Robert Dias, that's where we'll buy them from. And I hope I've impressed him with that.
Laura, I think to answer your question another way, hugely influential. Hugely influential. I think, I know a lot of you out there have got young children, and I think having a mother who was out of work certainly was inspiring. Also helped me to grow up quickly and learn that there wasn't somebody who you can just drop the dirty football kit off with, or sometimes, particularly when I got older, you had to make your own food, look after your own bedroom, and be responsible. Was hugely inspirational. The other side of it is, I think, mum and dad used to share everything at home. So I was quite often just as likely to see my dad doing the ironing as my mother. And I never grew up thinking there was a woman's role and a man's role. And I think that's down to both mum and dad and the way we were brought up.
If I can say, my sister, who married a guy 15 years older than me, so he'd be over 100 now, if they went out together in the car, he would never let her drive. Men drove, not women.
Yeah.
And all these little petty things, I think slightly bypassed me. They didn't occur to me. My husband wasn't like that. And my sister's husband, right up until he died, she didn't know what he'd got, what he'd done, what was hidden where, what he owned, what he didn't. I knew everything.
Yeah. Thank you for the question, Laura. Are there any other questions? Gabby, you're raising your hand.
Yeah. I just wondered, Betty, you mentioned early on that if there were women who were promoted, they were very bossy, which we've all experienced. But I wondered, that was quite early on in your career when you mentioned that. I wondered if you'd had any, as you got further through your career, which was obviously incredibly long, did you see that improve at all?
I didn't get that.
So you were talking about when you were at Bupa, the women who got promoted were really bossy. And did you think that changed as you went to PSAC? Yeah.
When I took over HR in our office, I wasn't qualified in any sort of way, but I knew everybody's name. I knew everything that they'd had wrong with them. I knew they'd had measles several times when their medical certificates came in, and I always treated them as if I was interested in what they were telling me, whether I wasn't or not. And the guy who worked along beside me, so that if I was off, he would take over. He said, "How do you listen to all that rubbish that comes out of their mouths?" And I think because nobody listened to me, I was prepared to sit and listen to them. That's how it changed, I think.
Mm-hmm. Does that answer your question, Gabby?
Yes, thank you.
Lovely. Good. Anybody else got any questions? Is there... Christelle. Oh, we got Christelle and Margaret. Christelle, take you first.
You first? Okay, cool. Thank you very much, first of all, Betty. Just such a delight, actually, just to hear your story, and just personal and professional. I just wondered about your contemporaries. Did they also have that ambition and appetite to work? I mean, you said that it was a norm to get married and kids. I appreciate that, but I could see that there was very much a drive to continue your career even after you'd had the kids.
I didn't have a proper career. I did this market research, and I found homes for French students. The kids benefited from that because when they went to the theatre or when they went on day outings or wherever they went, you used to go with them, didn't you? So that was my job. Hold on a minute, Mark. Okay. Hold on.
Duty told, Mark.
But when I got to about 12 years at home, or 13, a lot of my friends started to go back. Yeah. Some of them started to take their exams to be teachers, right, and things like that. And I was playing badminton with old women of 60. I'm 87 now, but old women of 60, or else younger ones of 25. And I just felt out of... So I think even if my husband hadn't been ill, I would have eventually... And when I went back to work, and perhaps I wouldn't have needed to have worked so long, I preferred being out at work than being at home.
Great. Fantastic.
Does that answer?
You really enjoyed the commuting and all the markets in London and the pace of life in the city up there. Yeah.
And all the places my boss, when he was going to meet somebody about the pensions, he used to take me along, and I ate in all these lovely places up in London. I was so lucky. Yeah. I had to put my best suit on and act like a lady.
But you did have you did have a career though, didn't you?
It was lovely.
But I don't remember many of my friends' mothers working. Really, well, there's a few that touched it, yeah, but
no, Mark, they'd all gone back to work, except for funny people like Linda Gabriel's mother went back to work. The bicycle shop people went back to work.
Okay.
It was only the fuddy-duddy old women who didn't play badminton.
Okay. All right.
Or didn't take their kids swimming.
Brilliant. Margaret, you were going to ask a question.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was really inspirational. My question is from all your career and your life experience, if you could give any advice to all of us, all the women, what would that be? Like what we should or shouldn't be doing, just from your experience as a woman to woman.
Well, I always remember this little girl. She came into the office, she was about 20, and I used to see all the new people that came in, and I said to her, do you know you can't go on the pension scheme till you're 24? And our company wouldn't let you join it until you'd been with them for 6 months in any case. It's because it's too much bother putting you in the pension scheme and taking you out if you left. But this little girl said to me, she was as daft as you come, and she said to me, I'm not going to be a little old lady in one room, not being able to afford my Sunday roast. And I can't remember what the question was now.
What advice would you give to anybody?
And when I got to 50 and my children were offhand, I saved a lot of my pension. And when we retired, if I could go back over my life again, I don't know what you think, you girls, but I would like to be 60 again.
All right. But it sounds like the advice is to make sure you look after your money and look after yourself.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the best advice I had when I got married was from my mother: don't do everything yourself, or else you'll end up doing everything. and from an aunt that I went and lived with, put some money away and don't let him know what you've done. And I think you've got to look after yourselves because nobody else is going to look after you, honestly. My husband looked after me, don't take that wrong. Don't take that the wrong way. But you've got to think what you want in life. And when I was 60, I had the time to travel the world, not just go away for a fortnight, we went to Australia and New Zealand for 3 months. I went for about 6 weeks out to China with a girlfriend, and I've got the money to do it because that's when you've got the time, isn't it? And that's what I say, look after yourself. And I often say that I wished I was 60 again. And we moved down here and we've lived back in Hove all that time. And that's what I would say to you. Think what you want to do in 20 years' time. Don't think that's a long way off because it isn't.
Christelle, it looks like we've got a guest for E2W Wealthier.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Who wants to ask a question?
I actually have one more fun one. I forgot to ask it before, Mark. I did just ping it to you.
Okay.
Betty, what netball position did you play?
Pardon?
So we didn't catch that.
What netball position did you play?
What netball position did you play?
I played shooter attack. I don't know what they call it now.
Yeah, no, same. I play 3 or 4 times a week. Well, that's the worst part about lockdown, no netball. But when you said that earlier. So yes, I was shooter as well.
I played for Sussex and I played for the Midland Bank where they had London or the rest of England, and I played for the rest of England.
Excellent.
But the best thing I've ever done is my bowling, isn't it?
Yes.
I played bowls, but it's not very fashionable anymore.
No, well, you took that up when you retired, though, didn't you?
Yes, I took that up when I retired. I umpired for England. I was a senior Sussex county coach and an examiner, and I played in all the county competitions. And that's why I enjoyed being 60 so much, I think.
Yeah. And you've only had to stop recently because of your arthritis.
If you look at my hands,
I
can't move it. And my feet are the same. I can't, I've got an electric buggy. I go, that's the best thing I bought, isn't it?
If you ever come down to Brighton or Hove and you're along the seafront and they have the skateboarders are going in and out of cones along the seafront, quite often you'll see Mum in her buggy following them through the cones, which is quite famous down here, aren't you?
They call me Sterling Moss.
Anyway, right.
I don't know who Sterling Moss is.
They probably do. They probably do. Any more last questions before we sign off for today? Then I'm just going to thank you, everybody, and thank you, Mum, for sharing your story. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to all the rubbish that's come out of my mouth.
No, don't be silly.
And I want to finish by saying every day, every month, when I look at my company pension going into my bank account, I'm thankful I've got it.
Yeah. Thanks. Thank you, Mum. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Guys,
brilliant.
We will see you all next week. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Goodbye. Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys.